The biting cold of December 16, 1944, clung heavy in the German air, a premonition of the brutal dawn about to break. It was 6:30 hours near Monschau, and the biting frost wasn't the only chill Headman Klaus Recha of the elite 12th SS Panzer Division felt. His hand, numbed by the cold and perhaps by a dawning terror, scratched frantically across a frost-covered page in his combat log. What he penned that morning wouldn't just be another entry in the Wehrmacht's grim chronicles. It would articulate a profound, terrifying shift in the very nature of war. "The Americans possess a new weapon," he wrote, his words likely imbued with a desperate urgency. "A device that utterly defies all conventional tactical doctrine." This wasn't the usual lament of a soldier facing superior firepower or numbers. This was something fundamentally different, something that shattered centuries of military wisdom. His men, hardened veterans of countless brutal campaigns, were being systematically slaughtered in their foxholes. The artillery shells weren't merely striking the ground, leaving craters that offered a perverse form of shelter for those fortunate enough to be dug in. No, these projectiles were exploding, not on impact, but in the air directly above them. This wasn't just a deadly new form of bombardment, it was an existential threat. Recha's report continued, a chilling testament to the psychological warfare this new technology wrought. There is no defense, no cover. Death comes from the sky itself. Imagine the sheer terror of that realization. A soldier's instinct, honed by millennia of warfare, is to seek cover, to dig deeper, to find protection from incoming fire. But what if the very act of seeking cover became a trap? What if the earth itself, once a reliable shield, offered no sanctuary? This wasn't merely a technological upgrade, it was a paradigm shift, a weapon that fundamentally altered the calculus of survival on the battlefield. It was a secret that, in a few horrifying moments, would shatter the morale of an entire division and redefine the brutality of modern combat. Through the lingering morning mist, thick and oppressive, Recha had just been a helpless witness to the annihilation of an entire battalion. These men had been attempting a crossing of open ground near Hofen, a maneuver fraught with danger even under normal circumstances, but now rendered suicidal. This wasn't a case of direct hits, which, surprisingly, were relatively rare in the vast, imprecise world of artillery warfare. Nor was it about conventional time-fused shells, those intricate devices that demanded impeccable calculation, ranging, and perfect timing to achieve even modest effectiveness. No, this was something truly impossible, something that felt supernatural. These shells somehow knew exactly when to detonate, exploding with horrifying precision approximately 30 feet above the heads of his unsuspecting soldiers. The resulting explosion unleashed a lethal cone of shrapnel downwards, fragments that scythed through flesh and bone in a pattern no trench, no foxhole, no entrenchment, however deep or reinforced, could possibly protect against. In a mere 3 minutes of this unspeakable barrage, an astonishing 702 German soldiers lay dead or dying. The few survivors who somehow stumbled back from that inferno were not just physically broken. They were in a profound state of psychological shock, a mental incapacitation so severe that they could articulate only one chilling phrase. Over and over they repeated, "Die Luft todet." The air kills. It was a primal fear, a reversion to ancient superstitions, because what they had experienced defied all rational understanding of warfare. What Hetman Recha, and indeed the entire Wehrmacht, was tragically unaware of, was that he had just witnessed the devastating combat debut of America's most closely guarded secret weapon in ground warfare. This wasn't just another piece of military hardware. It was a device so profoundly revolutionary, so utterly paradigm-shifting, that it would ultimately increase artillery effectiveness by a staggering 1,000%. More than that, it would save tens of thousands of Allied lives, and, in the process, fundamentally alter the very nature of conflict forever. This was the proximity fuse, a marvel of miniaturized engineering. A complete radar system, no larger than a soda can, crammed ingeniously into an artillery shell. It was, in essence, the world's first true smart weapon, a thinking munition that would prove more decisive in turning the tide of the war than almost any other secret technology, save for the atomic bomb itself. The mathematical evidence of its devastating impact would soon become overwhelmingly clear, undeniable, and universally feared. Consider the stark numbers, the cold, hard facts that underscore its transformative power. Where conventional anti-aircraft shells, with their hit or miss mechanics, typically required an average of 500 rounds to bring down just one enemy aircraft, the new proximity-fused shells needed only a fraction of that, just 155 rounds for the same result. That's a dramatic increase in efficiency, saving precious ammunition, gun barrels, and, crucially, time. On the ground, the impact was even more profound. Traditional artillery, struggling against entrenched positions, could achieve casualty rates of only about 5% among soldiers hiding in trenches. The proximity fuse, by contrast, achieved a staggering 70% casualty rate. This wasn't an incremental improvement. It was a wholesale reinvention of the artillery battlefield. And when London's very survival hung precariously in the balance against the relentless onslaught of the V-1 flying bombs, a weapon designed to bypass conventional defenses, the proximity fuse again proved its mettle. Within just 4 weeks of its deployment, these intelligent shells were destroying an astounding 79% of incoming V-1 missiles, transforming despair into defiance. Yet, the story of this revolutionary weapon, this thinking shell, did not begin in the gleaming laboratories of America, amidst the industrial might of a nation preparing for war. No, its genesis lay in the desperate, beleaguered hours of Britain's darkest moment, when the very survival of Western civilization seemed not just difficult, but impossible. It was October 30th, 1939, at an unassuming location in Exton, England, as the first bitter winter of the global conflict began to settle its icy grip over the British Isles. A young, brilliant scientist named WA, but submitted a proposal that, unbeknownst to him at the time, would fundamentally alter the future of warfare forever. Working diligently at the air defense establishment alongside his equally brilliant colleagues, Edward S. Shire and Amherst Thompson, but had conceived of something that, in the context of 1939, sounded like pure science fiction, a fantastical concept ripped from the pages of a futuristic novel, an artillery shell that could somehow think for itself. The inspiration for this audacious concept emerged not from fanciful dreams, but from the brutal, unyielding mathematical realities of warfare. During the First World War, the early, crude anti-aircraft gunners faced a formidable challenge, firing an average of 8,500 shells for every single enemy aircraft they managed to bring down. By 1939, with aircraft flying at unprecedented speeds and altitudes, pushing the boundaries of what was technologically possible, This already abysmal ratio had worsened considerably. Britain's impending survival in the terrifying air war to come, a conflict already taking shape over the Channel, would depend entirely on dramatically improving these dismal odds. Butt's proposed solution was elegant in its simplicity, yet breathtaking in its ambition. Using radio waves, these shells would detect approaching aircraft and automatically detonate at the precise, optimal distance for maximum destructive effect. But Butt faced a problem that seemed utterly insurmountable with the limited technology of 1939. His theoretical radio fuse would need to survive an unimaginable ordeal. Being fired from a gun at forces exceeding 20,000 times normal gravity, spinning at a dizzying rate of 30,000 revolutions per minute, operating flawlessly in extreme temperatures ranging from a frigid 50 to a scorching 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and still maintain the exquisite sensitivity required to detect an aircraft some 70 feet away. It was a laundry list of engineering nightmares, each presenting a monumental hurdle. Undeterred, British scientists, with characteristic ingenuity and resolve, began constructing prototypes by June 1940. They tested these early iterations not in traditional artillery, but in unrotated projectiles, essentially rockets, against balloon targets. The tests, while proving the fundamental concept viable, also brutally revealed the crushing technological challenge ahead. No existing electronic components, no vacuum tubes or delicate wiring could possibly withstand the sheer violence of being fired from a conventional gun barrel. It was a technological brick wall, a bottleneck that threatened to doom the entire enterprise. The truly innovative solution to this seemingly intractable problem, this missing piece of the puzzle, would ultimately come from across the Atlantic. It arrived during Britain's most desperate hour, delivered by one of history's most important, yet often overlooked, scientific missions. On September 6, 1940, in the bustling port of Halifax, Nova Scotia, the Canadian Pacific liner Duchess of Richmond docked, carrying cargo far more valuable than gold or jewels. Aboard was Sir Henry Tizard, a towering figure in British science, accompanied by a modest black metal deed box. Inside that unassuming box lay every major British military secret, meticulously documented and carefully protected. The Tizard mission, as history would come to remember it, represented an unprecedented gamble, a roll of the dice in the face of annihilation. Here was a nation fighting desperately for its very survival, bravely choosing to share its most closely guarded military technologies with a country that, at that pivotal moment, was not yet formally at war. It was an act of profound strategic trust and scientific altruism, a recognition that the collective survival of democratic nations transcended nationalistic hoarding of information. The British delegation, a collection of some of the brightest minds in the Allied world, assembled in Washington on September 12th, taking residence at the elegant Wardman Park Hotel. For an intensive week, they meticulously unveiled Britain's technological treasures. They presented detailed plans for advanced radar systems, showcased groundbreaking jet engine designs, shared explosive new technologies, and revealed the cutting edge of chemical weapons research. But it was on September 19th, in a discreet conference room overlooking Connecticut Avenue, that British physicist Dr. John Cockcroft presented something truly special, something that held the key to a radical new future in warfare. He presented it to a young, unassuming American physicist who had been specifically summoned for this highly classified meeting, Dr. Merle A. Tuve. Tuve, then 39 years old, sat utterly transfixed, absorbing every word as Cockcroft methodically explained the intricate details of British proximity fuse research. Tuve, a man raised in the vast rural expanses of South Dakota, had spent his formative childhood years tinkering with radio sets, a passion he shared with his childhood friend, Ernest Lawrence, who would later achieve global recognition and win the Nobel Prize. Just 1 month earlier, in August 1940, Vannevar Bush, the visionary director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, had appointed Tuve to lead a new, highly secret section of the National Defense Research Committee. This was Section T, specifically created with the singular mission of developing proximity fuses. Tuve's appointment, it turned out, hadn't been a random bureaucratic decision. It was deeply personal. Earlier that summer, he had been listening to radio reports of the devastating London Blitz with his wife, Winnie. The broadcaster's somber voice described children being tragically pulled from rubble, entire neighborhoods being wiped off the map in a matter of minutes, and the desperate, heartbreaking inadequacy of existing British air defenses against the relentless German bombardment. Tuve had turned to his wife, tears welling in his eyes, a profound sense of urgency gripping him. "We have to find a way to stop those bombers," he had declared, his voice thick with emotion. "Technology has to provide the answer." And now, in that Washington conference room, Dr. Cockcroft was quite literally handing him exactly that opportunity. The chance to transform his anguish into action, his scientific prowess into a life-saving weapon. However, the British concept, while undeniably brilliant and conceptually sound, remained largely theoretical. No one, neither the British nor the Americans, had yet solved the fundamental, seemingly intractable problem: how to manufacture vacuum tubes and other delicate electronic circuits that could withstand the unimaginable forces generated when fired from a gun. Cockcroft was brutally honest and forthright about British limitations, a testament to their desperate situation and trust in their newfound ally. He explained that they simply lacked the industrial capacity, the raw materials, and the immense resources required to pursue the kind of massive, complex development program that this revolutionary technology demanded. America, with its burgeoning industrial base, its vast, untapped resources, and its geographically protected position, represented the only hope, the sole nation capable of transforming this desperate idea into a tangible reality. Dr. Tuve left that pivotal meeting with a mission that would completely consume the next 5 years of his life. It was a challenge that would mobilize the entirety of the nascent American electronics industry, pushing the boundaries of innovation and production to their absolute limits. The task ahead seemed utterly impossible, a scientific Everest demanding solutions that simply didn't exist yet. It would require entirely new innovations, manufacturing techniques never before attempted, and a scale of production that defied conventional comprehension. By December 1940, the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism, nestled within the Carnegie Institution in Washington, D.C., became the crucible of this ambition. The stately mansion at 15241 Broad Branch Road was swiftly and secretly transformed into the nerve center of America's most classified weapons program. Tuve, a man of relentless drive and uncompromising intellect, had assembled an extraordinary team, a veritable dream team of scientific minds whose collective brilliance would reshape the very landscape of warfare. Among them were Richard B. Roberts, a nuclear physicist who had once worked alongside the legendary Niels Bohr; Henry H. Porter, an undisputed expert in acoustics; Robert B. Broad, who had dedicated his studies to cosmic rays, Lawrence Hafstad, a specialist in nuclear physics, Lloyd Berkner, a true pioneer in ionospheric research, and a remarkably young 26-year-old physicist named James Van Allen, whose later discovery of Earth's radiation belts would immortalize his name, but whose wartime contributions, equally vital, would remain classified for decades. The audacious challenge these brilliant minds faced defied every existing assumption about electronics. A proximity fuse, in its essence, would need to be a complete, fully functional radar system, comprising a transmitter, a receiver, an amplifier, and a detonator, all compressed into a space smaller than a conventional coffee can. It would need to generate radio waves, detect their minuscule reflections from approaching targets, process that incredibly faint signal, and then trigger the detonation, all while simultaneously experiencing forces that would instantaneously pulverize any conventional electronic device. The sheer miniaturization and ruggedization required were unheard of, pushing the very limits of what 1940s technology was believed to be capable of. James Van Allen, with characteristic tenacity, took on perhaps the most fundamental and seemingly insurmountable challenge: creating vacuum tubes that could survive the extreme trauma of being fired from a gun. Traditional vacuum tubes, with their delicate glass envelopes and fragile filaments, were exquisitely sensitive. They shattered into 1,000 pieces at forces of just 100 times gravity. The proximity fuse, however, would need to survive an acceleration 200 times greater than that, an incomprehensible G-force that seemed guaranteed to turn any existing electronic component into a pile of useless debris. For a grueling 6 months, Van Allen collaborated closely with a small Massachusetts hearing aid company called Raytheon. This unlikely partnership between cutting-edge physics and specialized miniaturization began developing revolutionary miniaturized tubes designed with unprecedented construction techniques. Instead of the conventional method of hanging delicate filaments from fragile wires, they engineered rigid structures, ingeniously borrowing and adapting techniques from the niche world of hearing aid manufacturing. The pivotal breakthrough, the aha moment that unlocked the door to success, arrived in January 1942, with Van Allen's brilliant mousetrap spring innovation. This ingenious mechanical system provided robust protection for the tube filaments during the massive acceleration forces of firing. Then, with elegant precision, release them for normal operation once the shell was in stable flight. The patent for this incredibly vital device would remain classified, hidden from the world until 1947, a testament to its strategic importance. But it represented one of the most critical electronic innovations of the entire war. A silent revolution in miniaturization and ruggedization that would echo through technological development for decades to come. Meanwhile, Lloyd Berkner achieved another crucial breakthrough in December 1940. He developed a sophisticated circuit design that ingeniously employed separate transmitter and receiver functions. This was a significant leap forward, advancing far beyond the simpler, more limited British autodyne concept, which used a single tube for both functions. Berkner's innovation was monumental. It allowed the fuse to detect targets at significantly greater distances with substantially higher reliability, a crucial factor for achieving effective combat performance. The ability to detect a target sooner meant more time for calculation, more opportunities for engagement, and a higher probability of a kill. By March 1942, The sheer scale and rapid progress of the project had utterly outgrown the initial facilities at the Carnegie Institution. Johns Hopkins University, recognizing the urgency and promise of the work, established the Applied Physics Laboratory, APL, in an abandoned Chevrolet dealership at 8601 Georgia Avenue in Silver Spring, Maryland. The building, when the first scientists arrived, still reeked faintly of motor oil and rubber, a strange, almost anachronistic scent for what was to become a center of scientific innovation. But within weeks, this humble, utilitarian structure housed the most advanced electronics laboratory in the entire world, a testament to American adaptability and scientific prowess. Merle Tuve became APL's first director, meticulously establishing a laboratory culture that would come to define American weapons development for decades. He fostered an environment of relentless urgency, innovation, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. Signs, stark and unapologetic, appeared on every wall, reflecting Tuve's ethos. One famously read, "I don't want any damn fool in this laboratory to save money. I only want him to save time." Another, equally impactful, declared, "Our moral responsibility goes all the way to the final battle use of this unit. Its failure there is our failure." Oh, these weren't just motivational slogans. They encapsulated a profound sense of purpose, a direct link between the intellectual work in the lab and the lives being risked on distant battlefields. The technical specifications of what they ultimately achieved still seem impossible, almost miraculous, even by today's advanced standards. The proximity fuse operated as a continuous wave radar system, transmitting at frequencies between 180 and 220 MHz. In 1940, these were considered the absolute cutting edge of radio technology, pushing the boundaries of what was then understood about electromagnetic waves. The projectile's metal shell body was ingeniously repurposed to serve as the transmitting antenna. Excited by a small, precisely designed conical antenna located in the shell's nose. The entire system employed an autodyne configuration, a marvel of compact design where a single oscillator tube functioned remarkably as both transmitter and receiver. This elegance of design was born not just from ingenuity, but from brutal space constraints. Every millimeter inside that shell was precious. Inside a space barely 5 inches long and 2 inches in diameter, these engineers somehow packed 4 miniaturized vacuum tubes, an astonishing 130 individual electronic components, a wet cell battery, multiple safety mechanisms, and the entire detonator system. The oscillator tube generated a 70 MHz signal, with harmonics extending up to the 180 to 20 MHz range. When these radio waves bounced off approaching targets, an enemy aircraft, a V-1 bomb, or even an infantry squad, they created subtle interference patterns that subtly varied the oscillator's loading. This variation produced beat frequencies in the 200 to 800 Hz range. These tiny, faint signals were then amplified through a 2-stage amplifier, meticulously filtered for the specific frequencies that clearly indicated an approaching target, and then, finally, triggered a thyrotron gas-filled tube that initiated the all-important detonation sequence. It was a symphony of precision, a mechanical brain in a bullet. The power source for this miniature marvel represented yet another seemingly impossible innovation. Traditional batteries of the era simply couldn't survive the immense G-forces of firing, nor could they provide sufficient power within such a minuscule space. The solution, a stroke of genius, came from the National Carbon Company. they developed a revolutionary reserve battery using a liquid electrolyte stored in a fragile glass ampule. The shock of firing the shell would deliberately shatter this ampule. Then, the powerful centrifugal force generated by the shell's rapid spin would ingeniously drive the electrolyte into stacked carbon and zinc plates, instantly activating the battery during flight. This meant the battery had an almost unlimited shelf life before use, crucial for wartime logistics, but provided full power exactly when needed, mid-flight. Safety systems, equally ingenious, were built in to prevent premature or accidental detonation through multiple overlapping mechanisms. Centrifugal switches, for instance, remained open until the shell reached its proper, safe spin rate, ensuring it wouldn't explode prematurely in the gun barrel or near friendly forces. A vital 0.5 to 0.7 second arming delay after firing further prevented detonation near friendly troops, allowing the shell to travel a safe distance. Moreover, the fuse's sensitivity increased gradually during flight, reaching its maximum effectiveness precisely at typical engagement ranges, ensuring optimal performance where it mattered most. This was not just a weapon. It was a testament to meticulous engineering and unwavering attention to detail. Recognizing that a weapon that wasn't safe was perhaps even more dangerous than no weapon at all. January 5th, 1943, 08 hours. The Southwest Pacific, near Guadalcanal. On the USS Helena, a light cruiser, the ship's radar operators detected incoming aircraft. 4 Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers, a formidable threat, approaching at 12,000 feet. Lieutenant Russell "Red" Cochran, commanding the aft 5-inch battery, had only just been briefed on the capabilities of the new, mysterious ammunition days before. He still harbored a healthy skepticism, perhaps even a degree of bewilderment. In the magazine below, gunners carefully loaded shells marked with distinctive special green bands, the Navy's discreet indication of these new, revolutionary proximity-fused rounds. "Range 8,000 yards and closing," barked the rangefinder operator, his voice cutting through the tension. Cochran watched the approaching Japanese planes through his binoculars, their silhouettes growing larger, more menacing with every passing second. In conventional combat, his guns would need direct hits, an almost impossible feat against highly maneuverable, fast-moving aircraft. But these shells, he'd been told, were different. They only needed to pass within approximately 70 feet of the target. "Commence firing," he ordered, his voice steady. The first salvo erupted from Helena's guns with a deafening roar. The shells traced fiery red arcs across the morning sky, a lethal ballet passing tantalizingly near the lead Val. But nothing happened. They were still too distant, the fuse's internal calculations determining it wasn't yet optimal. A collective sigh of disappointment might have rippled through the crew. But then the second salvo followed, a mere 15 seconds later. At 5,000 yards from the Helena, at an altitude of 11,000 feet, one shell passed approximately 60 feet from the lead bomber. The explosion that followed was unlike anything Cochran or his seasoned crew had ever witnessed. Instead of the shell continuing past the plane, a common occurrence or exploding on a direct impact, which would have been a rare, lucky shot, it detonated in midair with a perfect spherical burst, sending a deadly pattern of fragments outward. The Val's wing sheared off instantly, a dramatic, catastrophic failure. The engine, riddled with hundreds of high-velocity steel fragments, burst into a furious inferno. The aircraft didn't break apart dramatically, with the smoke and fire trailing like a Hollywood special effect. It simply ceased flying, transforming instantaneously from a controlled dive bomber into a tumbling, burning mass of aluminum, devoid of any lift or direction. "Splash one," called the spotter, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The remaining Vals, their attack formation shattered, and their morale undoubtedly shaken by this terrifying, invisible killer, broke off their attack, scattering in desperation. But Helena's guns were relentless, tracking them with precision. 3 more salvos followed, 12 more proximity-fused shells arcing skyward. A second Val exploded when a shell detonated a mere 40 feet below its fuselage, the upward-directed fragments piercing fuel tanks and killing the pilot instantly, turning the aircraft into a flying fireball. In the radio room, the combat report was already being meticulously encoded. Enemy aircraft engaged with special ammunition. 2 confirmed destroyed. Ammunition performance exceeded all expectations. What that terse official report failed to capture, however, was the profound psychological impact this new technology had on Helena's crew. Gunner's mate, First Class Anthony Pui, later recalled, his voice still filled with wonder decades later. "We couldn't believe it. For months, we'd fired thousands of rounds at planes, maybe hitting one if we were lucky. Now we were knocking them down with just a few shots. It was like God himself was guiding our shells." Samuel Eliot Morrison, the Navy's official historian, who was himself present in the Pacific Theater, would later write with a historian's perspective, "The smoking fuselages and bright surface bonfires attested the accuracy of anti-aircraft batteries and the efficiency of the super-secret Mark 32 shell fuse." The impact of this revolutionary technology rippled through the Pacific Fleet with stunning speed, changing not just tactics, but morale. This wasn't the first test, though. Even before Helena's dramatic combat debut, on August 12, 1942, the USS Cleveland had conducted a pivotal test that convinced the skeptical Navy brass to stake everything on this new technology. In Chesapeake Bay, the cruiser faced 3 radio-controlled drone aircraft, sophisticated targets designed to perform aggressive, evasive maneuvers, far more challenging than a simple balloon. The test had been scheduled for 2 full days, allowing for extensive evaluation. It lasted less than 2 hours. The first drone was destroyed with the second burst of proximity-fused shells. The second drone was eliminated on the 4th burst. The third drone was utterly obliterated on the first burst. The Navy observers, hardened veterans who had seen every technological advance and every combat innovation, were so utterly shocked by the raw, undeniable effectiveness that they immediately canceled the remaining tests and, without hesitation, ordered mass production. Admiral William Spike Blandy, watching in stunned silence from Cleveland's bridge, turned to his aide, his expression a mixture of awe and strategic realization. "This changes everything. Every ship in the Pacific needs these rounds immediately." It was a moment of profound recognition, a turning point in naval warfare. By spring 1943, proximity fuses were flowing to the Pacific in extraordinary quantities, a testament to America's rapidly mobilizing industrial might. The first 5,000 rounds were personally dispatched to the aircraft carriers USS Enterprise and USS Saratoga, and to the light cruiser USS Helena, under the personal supervision of Commander W.S. Parsons, the very same officer who would later be entrusted with the monumental task of arming the atomic bomb aboard the Enola Gay. Security around these devices was absolute, bordering on paranoid. The shells were stored in special, heavily guarded magazines, their locations known only to a select few. Only gunnery officers were comprehensively briefed on their true capabilities. Crew members, to maintain the utmost secrecy, were told they were merely special incendiary rounds, a plausible cover story designed to explain their distinctive appearance without revealing their true, revolutionary nature. The statistics from 1943 unequivocally revealed the profound transformation these fuses wrought. Although proximity fuses comprised only 25% of the total anti-aircraft ammunition fired by the Pacific Fleet, they accounted for an astonishing 51% of all Japanese aircraft destroyed by naval gunfire. The rounds per kill ratio, a critical metric of effectiveness, plummeted dramatically. For conventional time-fused shells, it stood at a disheartening 58 rounds per kill. With proximity-fused ammunition, that number dropped to just 15.5 rounds per kill. A staggering threefold improvement that would only continue to increase as gun crews gained more experience and refined their techniques with the new weapon. Gunner's mate, Second Class Robert Chen, serving aboard the formidable USS Essex, meticulously documented this dramatic change in his personal diary, offering a raw, first-hand account of the technological revolution unfolding around him. In March 1943, he wrote, "Fired 300 rounds at attacking Bettys, no hits." It was a familiar, frustrating refrain for naval gunners of that era. Then, in September 1943, a new entry appeared. New ammunition arrived with green bands. Fired 80 rounds at attacking Vals, destroyed 3. The difference was stark, undeniable. He added a poignant observation. "The guys think we've gotten better at shooting. They don't know it's the shells doing the thinking now." This wasn't just a technological upgrade. It was a shift in perception, a transfer of intelligence from human to machine, a concept that would redefine warfare. June 19, 1944. 10 hours, the Philippine Sea, some 200 miles west of Guam. Lieutenant James Van Allen, the very same brilliant physicist who had developed those seemingly impossible shock-proof vacuum tubes, stood on the flag bridge of the USS Washington. He watched with a mixture of scientific curiosity and profound personal investment as the radar screens around him began to fill with an ominous multitude of approaching contacts. This was it, the ultimate test of his invention, the culmination of years of tireless work and relentless innovation. The Japanese had launched their entire remaining carrier aviation strength, a massive, desperate armada of 423 aircraft, in a last-ditch, all-or-nothing attempt to destroy the American fleet supporting the Mariana Islands invasion. It was a gamble of epic proportions, known to history as the Marianas Turkey Shoot. Van Allen, commissioned in November 1942, had spent 16 intense months traversing the Pacific Fleet, personally training gunnery officers on the intricacies and capabilities of the new proximity-fused ammunition. He understood its theoretical effectiveness better than almost anyone. But theory, he knew, and the brutal reality of combat were often vastly different things. Raid 1 bearing 265, Angels 20, 69 aircraft, announced the Combat Information Center, its voice urgent. Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58, wasted no time. Launch all fighters, gun crews to battle stations, as waves of American Hellcat fighters tore into the massive Japanese formations. Those few enemy planes that managed to break through the formidable fighter screen faced a wall of proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire unlike anything ever witnessed in naval history. Van Allen watched, mesmerized, from Washington's bridge as the sky transformed into a canvas of black puffs, each one representing a proximity-fused detonation, each a tiny, deadly brain making a split-second decision. Japanese planes, once formidable threats, began falling from the sky like rain, consumed by fire and shrapnel. A Zero fighter, emblazoned with the rising sun, dove on the USS South Dakota, a formidable battleship, approximately 1,000 yards from Washington. Van Allen watched with a scientist's keen eye as South Dakota's 5-inch guns tracked the target smoothly, firing measured bursts, not the frantic, hopeful barrages of old. The third shell detonated a mere 50 feet from the Zero. The plane didn't explode in a dramatic fireball. It simply came apart. Wings separated from the fuselage with shocking ease. The engine fell free, and the pilot's body tumbled helplessly through space. It was systematic slaughter. Van Allen would later write to his wife, Winnie, the profound impact of the scene clearly etched into his memory. The proximity fuses turned our ships into fortresses. He acknowledged the bravery of the Japanese pilots, noting they kept coming even as their squadrons were annihilated. But courage, he concluded, couldn't overcome technology. By the end of that fateful day, the Japanese had lost a staggering 315 carrier aircraft, plus an additional 50 land-based planes, a catastrophic blow to their naval aviation capabilities. American losses, by stark contrast, amounted to a mere 29 aircraft, mostly due to operational accidents rather than enemy fire. The utterly one-sided nature of the battle effectively ended Japanese carrier aviation as a viable offensive force. They would never again launch a conventional carrier strike. Their next major tactic, born from pure desperation, would be the suicidal kamikaze attacks. Aboard the USS Bunker Hill, aviation radio man Charles Calhoun recorded his chilling observations. We could see them falling everywhere, in flames, in pieces, intact, but dead. He recalled the surreal scene of gunners laughing and crying at the same time. After 2 grueling years of enduring relentless Japanese air attacks, the tide had finally turned. We were finally giving it back, Calhoun noted, his words carrying the weight of past suffering and present triumph. The proximity fuses made our guns godlike. It was a visceral, emotional response to a technological marvel that shifted the balance of power so dramatically. October 25, 1944. 07:40 hours. Leyte Gulf, Philippines. Lieutenant Commander Robert Roberts watched in unadulterated horror from the flight deck of the USS White Plains as a Zero fighter, already trailing smoke and flames from anti-aircraft hits, deliberately and with chilling intent crashed into the flight deck of the escort carrier USS St. Lo. The ensuing explosion detonated torpedo warheads stored in the St. Lo's hangar deck, unleashing a cataclysm of fire and destruction. Within minutes, the St. Lo rolled over and sank, the first major warship lost to the terrifying new tactic of kamikaze attack. The Japanese, in their desperate ingenuity, had discovered the only effective countermeasure to the proximity fuse: eliminate the need to survive the attack. A plane destroyed 50 feet from its target by a proximity fuse had undeniably failed its mission. But a kamikaze destroyed 50 feet from its target would still, through sheer momentum, crash into the ship, achieving its horrific goal. The divine wind had begun to blow. Statistical analysis of this new, brutal phase of the war vividly revealed the tactical revolution the kamikaze represented. Conventional Japanese attacks, facing the now formidable proximity-fused defenses, achieved only a meager 2% success rate, translating to just 23 hits from 1,092 attempts between October 1944 and January 1945. Kamikaze attacks, however, achieved a shocking 34% success rate, recording 121 hits from 352 attempts. The proximity fuse had, in essence, rendered conventional air attacks suicidal, leaving the Japanese with little option but to embrace actual suicide as a viable tactic. Yet, even against these desperate kamikaze attacks, proximity fuses proved invaluable, their thinking capabilities still dramatically enhancing defenses. During the Philippines campaign, anti-aircraft guns, heavily reliant on proximity fuses, claimed 231 kills or deflections out of 364 kamikaze attacks, a still impressive 64% success rate against a truly determined, self-sacrificing foe. Proximity fuses alone accounted for 44% of all 5-inch gun kills during this brutal period. Without them, American casualties would undoubtedly have doubled or even tripled, the human cost soaring to unimaginable heights. Gunner's mate, William Fomby, serving aboard the USS Nashville, described the new, horrifying reality of fighting these living bombs. The Japs came at us like they didn't care about living anymore, because they didn't. Our proximity fuses would blow them to pieces, but the pieces kept coming. We'd turn a whole plane into confetti, but confetti traveling at 300 knots in May still hits hard. His words perfectly capture the macabre physics of kamikaze warfare. The fuses saved us from most of them, he concluded. But the ones that got through, God help those ships. It was a desperate, brutal fight, where technology saved many, but couldn't entirely negate the sheer willpower of a determined, suicidal enemy. May 11th, 1945. 15 hours. Radar Picket Station 15, 60 miles north of Okinawa. Commander Baron J. Milani of the USS Hadley, a Fletcher-class destroyer, watched the radar screen with growing dread. Kikusui No. 6 was incoming, a massive, coordinated kamikaze attack involving over 150 Japanese aircraft. Hadley and the USS Evans, another destroyer, stood alone at this forward picket station, the fleet's early warning system and its crucial first line of defense. Multiple raids, all vectors, estimated 150-plus bandits, reported the Combat Information Center, its voice strained but professional. Milani had drilled his crew relentlessly, knowing the stakes. Every man knew his job. Every procedure was ingrained. The 5-inch magazines were loaded entirely with proximity-fused shells, a testament to their critical importance. The gun crews had practiced until they could maintain an astonishing 15 rounds per minute per gun, the maximum sustainable rate, pushing human endurance to its limits. At 15:20, the first wave attacked, 12 aircraft screaming in from the north. Hadley's guns, a symphony of steel and fire, opened fire at a distance of 12,000 yards. The proximity fuses immediately began their deadly, invisible work. The first plane was destroyed at 8,000 yards, the second at 6,000, the third at 4,000. The fourth kamikaze, already burning fiercely, managed to crash some 50 yards off the starboard beam, showering the ship with debris but, miraculously, causing no serious structural damage. But this was just the beginning. For the next 95 minutes, the Hadley fought for its very survival against continuous, unrelenting waves of attackers. The gun barrels glowed an angry red hot from the continuous firing. Ammunition handlers, collapsing from sheer exhaustion, were quickly replaced by fresh reserves. Through it all, the proximity fuses never stopped working, never failed in their crucial task. Gunner's mate, Second Class Robert Eiley, manning Gun Mount 52, later testified, his words still vivid. They came from everywhere, high, low, all directions. The proximity fuses were beautiful. We'd fire, and 3 seconds later there'd be an explosion and burning pieces falling. Fire again, another explosion. It was like a rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. Wait. 3 seconds. Explosion. Boom, boom, boom. Explosion. It was a deadly, hypnotic dance, a testament to both technological prowess and human resilience. At 1615, Hadley's luck, though immense, finally began to run out. 3 kamikazes, all heavily damaged by proximity fuse explosions but still flying on sheer momentum, and the pilot's unwavering resolve, crashed into the ship in quick succession. A bomb from a 4th aircraft then exploded in the after-engine room, sealing the ship's fate. Hadley was devastated. 30 killed, 68 wounded, engineering spaces flooded, fires raging uncontrollably. Yet the ship survived, a testament to its robust construction and the heroic efforts of its crew. Even as damage control parties bravely fought the raging fires and flooding, the forward guns, those relentless mechanical brains, continued engaging attacking aircraft, their deadly rhythm unbroken. When the action finally ended at 1655, the USS Hadley had shot down an astonishing 23 aircraft, an all-time record for a destroyer in a single engagement. Commander Mullaney's after-action report stated unequivocally, "The proximity fuse was indispensable to our survival. Without it, we would have been overwhelmed in the first 20 minutes." He emphasized that, even damaged and burning, the fuses allowed us to continue defending ourselves when conventional ammunition would have been useless against such numbers. The Okinawa campaign's final statistics, despite the Hadley's heroic stand, were sobering. 1 to 900 Japanese aircraft launched in kamikaze attacks, 368 U.S. ships damaged, 34 sunk, 4,907 sailors killed, 4,824 wounded. Yet, post-war analysis concluded with startling clarity that without proximity fuses, casualties would have exceeded 15,000 with over 100 ships sunk. The proximity fuse had made the crucial difference between a painful victory and potential catastrophic defeat. It was a technological shield that saved countless lives. June 13, 1944, 04 hours, London. The distinctive, ominous pulse-jet engine sound echoed across the pre-dawn city, a harsh, incessant buzzing that would soon instill terror in millions. The first V-1 flying bomb of the main offensive impacted violently in Grove Road, Bethnal Green, killing 6 innocent civilians, including Mrs. Carrie Harrison, who tragically became the first London victim of Hitler's new, desperate revenge weapon. But unlike the terrifying Blitz of 1940-41, London now possessed a defense, a technological guardian that would have seemed utterly miraculous just 4 short years earlier. On June 12th, a mere day before the V-1 offensive began, and a week after the momentous D-Day landings, Winston Churchill, with characteristic boldness and strategic foresight, made a pivotal decision that would ultimately save thousands of lives. Against the urgent advice of security officials, who gravely feared the advanced technology would fall into German hands if a dud landed intact, Churchill authorized the immediate use of proximity fuses for London's defense. General Sir Frederick Pyle, commanding Anti-Aircraft Command, had already strategically deployed 500 heavy anti-aircraft guns, a mix of powerful British 3.7-inch and formidable American 90mm weapons, in a carefully constructed defensive belt south of London. Each gun was intricately linked to an SCR-584 microwave radar and M9 electronic gun directors, creating a highly sophisticated, automated defensive system. However, without the thinking capabilities of proximity fuses, even this advanced system achieved only a disheartening 24% success rate in the first week, a percentage that offered little comfort to a city under siege. Squadron leader Prudence Hill, serving diligently in the filter room at RAF Stanmore, meticulously tracked the unfolding transformation. The first week was terrifying, she recounted, the memory still vivid. We'd plot dozens of V1s approaching London, and most got through. The guns were firing constantly, but hitting almost nothing. Then, dramatically, something changed in the second week. Suddenly, the guns started destroying everything, she observed, her words capturing the palpable shift in effectiveness. The plotting board showed V1 after V1 disappearing 10 miles from London. What Hill and her colleagues witnessed was the arrival of proximity fuses, flown directly from American production lines, a desperate gambit to save a city. By the second week, gunners, now armed with these intelligent shells, were destroying an astonishing 46% of engaged V1s. The third week saw that number climb to 67%. And by the fourth week, an incredible 79% of the deadly missiles were being shot down. The improvement was so dramatic, so utterly profound, that German intelligence, baffled and unable to comprehend the sudden defensive prowess, reported back to Hitler that the British must have developed some new, secret anti-rocket weapon. They refused to believe their own fuses were working against them. Gunner Sergeant Kenneth Brown of the U.S. 184th AOA Gun Battalion, stationed near Biggin Hill, eloquently described the transformation. With regular shells, we had to predict exactly where the buzz bomb would be and when. 1 second off, 1 degree wrong, and we'd miss. It was a game of impossible precision against a moving target. With proximity fuses, he explained, we just had to get close. The shell would do the rest. He compared it vividly. It was like going from throwing darts blindfolded to throwing them with your eyes open. On August 28, 1944, this sophisticated defensive system achieved its ultimate triumph. Early warning radar detected 104 V1s launched at London. The proximity-fused guns destroyed 96 of them. RAF fighters, engaging the stragglers, got 4. Only 4 managed to reach London. The V1 threat to London, a weapon designed to break the city's spirit, was effectively neutralized. The statistics tell a powerful story of lives saved and a city spared. 9,300 V1 missiles were launched at London over 80 harrowing days. Approximately 2,240 of these were destroyed by proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire. Without this critical defense, estimated additional casualties would have exceeded 20,000 dead and 50,000 wounded. Churchill himself would later write, with historical perspective, the proximity fuse, more than any other single development, saved London from devastation by flying bombs. It was a technological shield, a silent protector. December 15, 1944. Antwerp, Belgium. Captain William Hartmann of the 407th AOSA Gun Battalion reviewed the latest intelligence report with a grim yet profound satisfaction. In the preceding 24 hours, his battalion had achieved an almost unbelievable feat, destroying 89 of 92 V1s targeted at Antwerp Harbor, a staggering 97% success rate that would have been an absolute fantasy just weeks earlier. Antwerp was far more than just a city. It was the vital lung through which the Allied armies in Europe breathed, a critical choke point for the entire war effort. Through its 26 miles of sprawling docks, an astonishing 25,000 tons of supplies flowed daily. Food, ammunition, fuel, critical medical supplies. Without Antwerp, the Allied advance into Germany, the very momentum of liberation, would inevitably strangle and grind to a halt. Hitler understood this strategic imperative perfectly. Between October 24, 1944, and March 27, 1945, Germany would launch an astounding 4,900 V-1s at Antwerp, more than half the total number fired at London, a relentless, desperate assault. The defense of Antwerp had started poorly, mirroring London's initial struggles. In early November, conventional time-fused shells achieved only a meager 40% success rate. V-1s were impacting the crucial port area at an alarming rate of 30 per day, threatening to completely shut down the vital supply line. Then, in mid-December, a Lancaster bomber made an emergency landing at Antwerp Airport. Its cargo a precious consignment. 10,000 proximity fuses, flown directly from Cincinnati on Winston Churchill's personal order. A desperate gamble by the British Prime Minister. Technical Sergeant Joseph Crack, operating an SCR-584 radar unit, witnessed the immediate, dramatic change. Before proximity fuses, he recalled, we'd track a buzz bomb perfectly, feed perfect data to the guns, and watch our shells explode behind, in front, above, below, everywhere but on target. It was a constant source of frustration and despair. After proximity fuses, he continued, same tracking, same data, but now every gunburst meant a dead buzz bomb. It was like someone had given us guided missiles. The German V-1 cruise missile launch sites in Holland, once so effective, simply couldn't comprehend what was happening. Launch sites that had successfully delivered 80% of their missiles to Antwerp now suddenly saw 90% destroyed in flight. They increased launch rates, varied launch times, and even tried flying V-1s at different altitudes. Nothing worked. The proximity fuses destroyed them all with relentless, almost mechanical efficiency. Private First Class Raymond Miller, an ammunition handler with the 126th WWII Battalion, described the overwhelming reality of sustained operations. We were firing so many proximity fuses that we ran out of storage. Trucks would arrive from the port with new shells, drive straight to the gun positions, and we'd load them directly into the guns. No inventory, no paperwork, just shoot, shoot, shoot. In one extraordinary 24-hour period, his gun position fired 1,400 rounds. That's 400 proximity fuses, he emphasized. Each one a miracle of engineering, burned through in one day. By February 1945, the defense had become so utterly effective that German V-1 crews began suffering a profound morale collapse. Luftwaffe Colonel Max Wachtel, commanding the entire V-1 offensive, reported directly to Hitler that continuing attacks on Antwerp were merely feeding missiles into a furnace. Hitler, however, stubbornly ordered the attacks to continue regardless, a futile gesture that achieved nothing except further depleting Germany's dwindling resources. The final statistics for Antwerp's defense stand as a powerful testament to the proximity fuse's impact. 2,183 V-1s destroyed out of 2,394 engaged, an astonishing 91.2% success rate. The vital port never closed. The supplies never stopped flowing. The Allied armies continued their inexorable advance into Germany, sustained by the lifeline that proximity fuses had kept open, a testament to silent technological victory. The morning of December 16, 1944, marked not just the chaotic beginning of Germany's last major offensive, the desperate gamble of the Battle of the Bulge, but also the combat debut of proximity fuses in ground warfare. At 0530 hours near Monschau, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group received frantic, increasingly desperate reports from his forward observers. German forces were attacking with overwhelming strength, a blitzkrieg of men and armor. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, holding a crucial section of the line, was outnumbered an astonishing 10-1. Axelson faced a terrible, almost impossible decision. In his ammunition bunkers, thousands of proximity-fused shells sat, delivered just days before with strict, unequivocal orders not to be used in ground combat under any circumstances. The risk of capture by enemy forces and the subsequent technological secrets being revealed was deemed too great, too catastrophic to contemplate. But without them, the cavalry squadron, along with the integrity of the entire front line, would be overrun within hours, obliterated by the German onslaught. At 06, Axelson, a man of courage and strategic vision, made the fateful decision that would revolutionize ground warfare. He gave the unprecedented order: load proximity fuses set for airburst. The first salvo landed with devastating effect among German infantry, advancing across snow-covered fields near Hofen. But instead of exploding on impact, a predictable outcome that would have allowed soldiers in their foxholes to survive, these shells detonated at their optimal height above the ground. The effect was nothing short of apocalyptic. Fragments rained downward in a lethal, wide-ranging cone, reaching into foxholes, behind walls, and even under vehicles. There was no cover, no protection, nowhere to hide from this invisible, omnipresent death. Forward observer Lieutenant Richard Rolston, watching the carnage unfold through his binoculars, reported with stark, stunned clarity. First salvo air burst over German infantry company in open. Estimate 80% casualties. Survivors running back to Woodline. Request immediate repeat on Woodline. The second salvo, responding instantly, air burst in the trees where the terrified Germans had sought desperately to find cover. The horrifying combination of high-velocity shell fragments and splintered wood created a killing zone that extended 100 yards deep into the forest. German soldiers, hardened veterans of 4 years of brutal combat on both the eastern and western fronts, experienced something entirely new, something that shattered their ingrained understanding of war. Artillery that killed regardless of cover. Feldwebel Otto Hartmann of the 12th Volksgrenadier Division miraculously survived the barrage and was captured 2 days later. His interrogation report, a chilling testimony, stated, "The artillery was unlike anything we had experienced in Russia or Normandy. We dove into foxholes, but the shells exploded above us. We ran to the forest, but the shells followed and exploded in the treetops. Men were screaming that the Americans had a new secret weapon. Entire platoons were eliminated in seconds." Word of Axelson's devastating success spread rapidly, reaching Eisenhower's headquarters with astonishing speed. By December 19th, Eisenhower had formally requested urgent permission to use proximity fuses across the entire front. Authorization, recognizing the critical situation, came swiftly on December 21st. Within hours, every American artillery unit in the Ardennes was firing proximity-fused shells, transforming the battlefield. General George S. Patton, never one for understatement, wrote to the War Department on December 28th, his words crackling with characteristic energy. The new shell with the funny fuse is devastating. The other night we caught a German battalion trying to cross the Sour River. We hit them with proximity fuses, battalion time on target. By actual count, 702 dead. The few survivors were so demoralized they surrendered immediately. This is a magnificent weapon. He then added, with chilling prescience, I think when all armies get this shell, we will have to devise some new method of warfare. I am glad you all thought of it first. Patton, a master of conventional warfare, recognized that this technology was fundamentally rewriting the rules of engagement. The proximity fuse, this marvel of engineering that was revolutionizing battlefields from the sun-drenched Pacific Islands to the snow-covered forests of Europe, began its journey in the most unlikely and mundane places. Converted bakeries, former automobile garages, and even Christmas light factories scattered across America. The astonishing transformation of Merle Tuve's laboratory prototype into a mass-produced combat-ready weapon represented one of the greatest yet least celebrated industrial achievements in history. By late 1942, the challenge of mass production seemed utterly insurmountable. Each individual proximity fuse required 130 precision components, many of which had never been mass-produced before. The miniature vacuum tubes alone demanded tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, an exquisite level of precision for wartime manufacturing. The entire assembly had to be absolutely perfect. A single failed component, a tiny flaw, meant a dud shell, a weapon that might inadvertently kill American soldiers instead of the enemy. A catastrophic failure in the heat of battle. The massive mobilization began with the Crossley Corporation in Cincinnati. Powell Crossley, Jr., who had made his fortune selling radios and refrigerators, a captain of civilian industry, immediately converted his entire facility to proximity fuse production. By January 1943, the assembly lines were operating relentlessly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, a testament to patriotic fervor and industrial might. Betty Morrison, an assembly line worker at Crossley from 1943 to 1945, vividly recalled her experience in a 1995 interview. We didn't know what we were making. Security was unbelievable. We were searched entering and leaving. No purses, no bags, nothing. She described the monotonous, precise work. We sat at benches 8 hours a day, soldering tiny components onto circuit boards. The supervisors told us we were making radio parts for aircraft. Only after the war did we learn we'd been building the proximity fuses that saved so many of our boys. It was a profound, delayed revelation, a quiet heroism hidden behind a veil of secrecy. The production numbers escalated at rates that defied comprehension, a truly astonishing industrial achievement. In December 1942, production stood at 500 units daily. By June 1943, it had surged to 8,000 daily. December 1943 saw an astounding 40,000 units produced every single day. By spring 1944, American factories were churning out 70,000 proximity fuses every single day. A truly mind-boggling figure that exceeded Germany's entire monthly production of conventional fuses. Sylvania Electric Products, located in Ipswich Mills, Massachusetts, became the single largest producer, a powerhouse of this secret war effort. The company employed an incredible 10,000 workers, 80% of whom were women, in a sprawling facility that had been farmland just 18 months earlier. They produced 100 million miniature vacuum tubes, achieving a production rate of 400,000 tubes daily, a figure equal to two-thirds of America's entire pre-war vacuum tube production. The human cost of this incredible industrial achievement, however, emerged only decades later, a tragic shadow cast by the bright light of victory. Workers, unaware of the insidious dangers, used beryllium for soldering connections. Pat Vlahos, whose mother worked at Sylvania, reported in 2003. She was diagnosed with malignant mesothelioma in 1983. She said she didn't know what they were building. It was all secret. The beryllium she handled every day for 3 years killed her 40 years later. It's a stark reminder that the sacrifices of war extended far beyond the battlefield, often silently and with delayed, devastating consequences. The production statistics tell their own powerful story of American industrial might and collective ingenuity. 87 companies involved, 110 factories operating, 80,000 workers at peak production, transforming university laboratories into Christmas light factories, hearing aid companies into automobile parts manufacturers. America, with unparalleled speed and scale, transformed its diverse industrial base to produce the world's first smart weapon. The cost reduction achieved through this unprecedented mass production was equally remarkable, a testament to efficient wartime innovation. The first units produced in 1942 cost $732 each, an equivalent of $11 trillion in 2020 dollars, a substantial investment. By 1945, through economies of scale and refined processes, the cost plummeted to just $18 each, equivalent to $256 in 2020 dollars. This represented a staggering 97.5% cost reduction, all while maintaining an impressive 80% operational reliability. It was a manufacturing miracle, an achievement that only American industry, with its unique blend of adaptability, innovation, and sheer scale, could achieve during the intense pressures of the 1940s. The proximity fuse program's security rivaled that of the top-secret Manhattan Project, and for very good reason. Had Germany or Japan somehow captured and reproduced this revolutionary technology, the Allied advantage, hard-won and crucial, would have vanished overnight, potentially prolonging the war or even altering its outcome. The security measures implemented were truly extraordinary, creating an impenetrable fortress of secrecy that, remarkably, held throughout the entire war. Captain S. R. Shoemaker of the Naval Bureau of Ordnance ingeniously invented the deliberately misleading name variable time fuse, VT fuse, specifically to cloak the true significance and functionality of the device. The Army, similarly, used meaningless letters that revealed nothing of its purpose. Factory workers, as we've heard, were told they were making innocuous radio components or electronic parts for aircraft. Even the simple abbreviation VT itself was classified. Gunnery crews, when asked about it, were simply told it stood for variable time. A plausible but entirely deceptive explanation. At the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, the very heart of its development, security bordered on paranoia, a necessity born of the immense stakes. Every single employee underwent rigorous FBI background checks. The facility operated under such a tight shroud of secrecy that local Silver Spring residents, observing groups of women arriving late at night and leaving early in the morning, naturally speculated about the building's true purpose. Security guards, trained to obscure identities, addressed everyone as doctor, regardless of their actual position, effectively preventing the identification of key personnel by name or rank. The close calls, moments where the secret almost unraveled, were numerous and terrifying. In July 1943, a dud proximity-fused shell, fired from a destroyer, tragically landed intact on a beach in Sicily. Headquarters immediately dispatched a specialized recovery team by air to retrieve it before German forces could possibly find it. They succeeded, but the incident led to stringent new regulations, restricting proximity fuse use over land until the desperate circumstances of the Battle of the Bulge necessitated their deployment. Then, in December 1944, the ultimate security nightmare occurred. During the fierce German offensive in the Ardennes, Wehrmacht forces overran an American ammunition dump containing an astonishing 20,000 proximity fuses. If German scientists had recognized what they had captured, had understood the true nature of these devices, they could have potentially developed countermeasures or, even worse, copied the technology, thereby nullifying the Allied advantage. Incredibly, German engineers examined the captured fuses and, in a monumental failure of imagination and technological understanding, concluded they were impossible. A post-war interrogation of Dr. Hans Gertian, Germany's leading fuse expert, revealed their fundamental error in thinking. We examined American fuses captured in the Ardennes. We concluded they could not function as claimed. No vacuum tube could survive the acceleration forces. The Americans were attempting to deceive us with propaganda about super weapons. The Germans had the proximity fuse literally in their hands and simply refused to believe it could work, a stunning testament to how far ahead American technology had leaped. Both Germany and Japan, recognizing the strategic importance of such a device, pursued proximity fuse development throughout the war, but neither achieved operational deployment, a critical failure that would prove decisive in their ultimate defeats. Germany's efforts were extensive but tragically fragmented. The Luftwaffe, for instance, pursued acoustic fuses, hoping to trigger them with aircraft engine noise. Rheinmetall-Borsig developed electrostatic field fuses. The Wehrmacht experimented with photoelectric fuses. The Marine, Navy, even explored magnetic influence fuses. Between 1940 and 1945, German research institutions, despite their scientific prowess, pursued an astonishing 30 to 50 different, often competing, proximity fuse designs. Dr. Werner Rambowski, a leading German proximity fuse researcher, explained post-war, shedding light on their predicament. We understood the theory perfectly. We had actually provided the British with early prototypes in the Oslo Report of 1939, but we lacked 3 critical elements. He enumerated them: miniaturized vacuum tubes that could survive acceleration, industrial capacity to mass-produce complex electronics, and centralized coordination of research efforts. The fragmentation of their research proved fatal. While America, under Merle-Tuve, concentrated all proximity fuse research under the unified Section T, Germany had myriad competing programs across the Luftwaffe, Wehrmacht, Kriegsmarine, and SS research facilities, none of which shared information effectively with the others. It was a classic example of internal competition stifling innovation during a critical national emergency. Japan's situation was even more desperate, a stark illustration of their technological limitations. Lieutenant Commander Yuzuru Fukao of the Imperial Japanese Navy Technical Research Institute later testified, almost with a sense of awe. We knew by 1943 that American anti-aircraft fire had become impossibly accurate. We suspected some form of proximity fuse, but could not imagine how it functioned. He admitted that we developed a photoelectric fuse by 1945, tested it once in a dropped bomb, but lacked industrial capacity for production. The Japanese response to proximity fuses was not a technological innovation, but a desperate tactical shift. Kamikaze attacks that accepted destruction as the price of reaching the target. It was, in essence, an admission of technological defeat, trading precious lives for their inability to match superior American innovation and industrial might. Behind the cold statistics and official battle reports were countless individual stories that profoundly illuminate the human dimension of the proximity fuse. Merle Tuve himself carried personal demons, a relentless sense of urgency that drove his unwavering dedication. His father had tragically died in the devastating 1918 influenza pandemic when Merle was just 17, plunging the family into poverty. His mother, a woman of immense strength, took in washing to help pay for his education, the laboratory walls displaying those stark injunctions to save time, not money, reflected his profound understanding that, in wartime, every delay, every wasted moment, could mean countless deaths. After particularly difficult tests, colleagues would often find him alone in his office at 3:00 a.m., staring intently at casualty reports from the Pacific, meticulously calculating how many lives faster production might save. It was a burden he carried deep within him. James Van Allen's transformation from a theoretical physicist to a pragmatic naval officer proved equally profound. After successfully developing those vital shock-proof vacuum tubes, he insisted on combat duty, driven by a deep desire to witness his inventions in action, to see them make a real difference. Aboard the USS Washington during the Philippine Sea Battle, he observed his tiny, resilient tubes protecting the very sailors he served alongside. It was the most satisfying moment of my scientific career, he later wrote, seeing theoretical physics save actual lives. It was a powerful validation of his life's work. Betty Thompson, an assembly worker at the Crossley Corporation, discovered only at a 1985 reunion, decades after the war, what she had truly built. For 40 years, I thought I'd made radio parts, she recalled. Then they showed us a film about proximity fuses. I started crying. All those tiny components I soldered. They were saving our boys from kamikaze attacks. We had no idea we were building miracles. Her story echoes that of countless Rosie the Riveters, who contributed to the war effort without fully knowing the direct impact of their precise, tireless work. Lieutenant Robert Cochran, the man who fired the first proximity fuse combat shots from the USS Helena, carried the immense weight of that moment throughout his entire life. In a 1975 interview, he reflected, "I knew we were firing something special. The security briefing made that clear. But when I saw that Japanese plane just come apart in midair without being hit directly, I realized we had something that would change everything. It was like being present at the invention of gunpowder." His words capture the true historical significance of what he witnessed. Technical Sergeant Marie Collins, one of the few women permitted inside the highly secretive applied physics laboratory, worked diligently on quality control testing. We would test fuses by firing them from air guns, checking if they armed properly, she recounted. One day, a fuse activated prematurely, nearly killing 3 technicians. We realized then that we weren't just building electronics. We were building weapons that had to be perfect, or Americans would die. It was a sobering, visceral understanding of their immense responsibility, The German perspective on the proximity fuse proved equally telling. Headman Klaus Rietzsche, the man who witnessed the horrifying first ground combat use of proximity fuses at Monschau, survived the war as a prisoner. In 1965, teaching at the reformed German General Staff College, he would tell his students, "The Americans possessed a weapon that made traditional defensive tactics obsolete overnight. In minutes, centuries of military doctrine became worthless. That is the power of technological superiority." His words stand as a stark, unsolicited endorsement of the proximity fuse's revolutionary impact. The proximity fuse's impact can be measured in stark mathematics, cold, hard numbers that unequivocally reveal its decisive contribution to Allied victory. Naval warfare statistics tell perhaps the clearest story. Pre-proximity fuse, in 1942, it required an astounding 500 to 2,000 rounds per aircraft destroyed, depending heavily on combat conditions, often a desperate gamble. With proximity fuses, from 1943 to 1945, that ratio plummeted to just 15. 5 rounds per aircraft destroyed, an improvement factor of 600 to 1,200%. During the entire Pacific War, proximity fuses destroyed an estimated 4,000 Japanese aircraft. Post-war analysis concluded that without proximity fuses, only 650 of these would have been destroyed by conventional ammunition. The 3,350 additional aircraft destroyed by proximity fuses, those invisible, thinking killers, would have killed an estimated 8,000 American sailors and sunk 40 to 50 additional ships. It's a chilling what-if scenario that underscores the fuse's life-saving impact. The V1 defensive campaign provides equally dramatic numbers. In London, 340 V1s were destroyed by proximity fuses. Without them, based on the dismal Week 1 success rates of conventional shells, only 560 would have been destroyed. The additional 1,680 V1s that would have reached their targets would have killed an estimated 9,000 civilians and wounded 25,000 more, an unthinkable human cost. Antwerp's defense was even more remarkable. 2,183 V1s were destroyed out of 2,394 engaged, a staggering 91.2% success rate. Without proximity fuses, achieving only the 40% rate of conventional shells, 1,400 additional V1s would have impacted the critical port area, almost certainly closing Antwerp and strangling Allied operations in northwest Europe. The strategic implications of that alone would have been catastrophic. Ground combat statistics from the Battle of the Bulge are equally compelling. 200,000 proximity-fused shells were fired in just 2 weeks. Estimated German casualties directly attributable to proximity fuses ranged from 10,000 to 15,000. Traditional artillery, with the same ammunition expenditure, would have achieved perhaps only 2,000 casualties. The psychological impact. Entire units surrendering rather than facing the terrifying, inescapable airburst bombardment cannot be fully quantified, but clearly contributed significantly to the ultimate failure of the German offensive. Production statistics reveal the almost unimaginable scale of American industrial supremacy. An astounding 22,703,481 proximity fuses were manufactured. 87 companies were involved, operating 110 factories, employing 80,000 workers at peak production. The total investment was $1 billion, equivalent to $15 billion today. The cost per kill analysis demonstrates remarkable efficiency. The average cost of a proximity fuse by 1945 was $18. Average conventional rounds required per aircraft kill was $502 each, totaling $1,000. Proximity fuse rounds per kill were 15.5 at $18 each, totaling 279. While proximity fuses cost more per kill in absolute dollars, they achieved that kill with 69% fewer rounds, dramatically reducing gun barrel wear, mitigating crew fatigue, easing logistical burdens, and, critically, dramatically increasing defensive success rates. It was an investment that paid dividends in lives and strategic advantage. The proximity fuse's immense importance was recognized at the highest echelons of Allied leadership, with testimonials that firmly place it among the war's most decisive technologies. Vannevar Bush, the visionary director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, provided perhaps the most comprehensive assessment. The proximity fuse created a seven-fold increase in the effectiveness of 5-inch anti-aircraft artillery in the Pacific, formed an important part of the radar-controlled anti-aircraft batteries that finally neutralized the German V-1 attacks on London, and fundamentally changed the tactics of land warfare beginning at the Battle of the Bulge. No other development save radar and the atomic bomb had comparable impact on the war's outcome. General Dwight D. Eisenhower's evaluation carried special weight, given his overarching strategic perspective as Supreme Allied Commander. If the Germans had succeeded in perfecting and using these new weapons 6 months earlier than they did, our invasion of Europe would have proven exceedingly difficult, perhaps impossible. The proximity fuse gave us a decisive advantage at the critical moment. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal declared to Congress in 1945, "The proximity fuse has helped blaze the trail to Japan. Without the protection this ingenious device has given the surface ships of the fleet, our westward push could not have been so swift, and the cost in men and ships would have been immeasurably greater." Admiral Willis Ching Lee, commander of battleships in the Pacific, was typically direct and to the point. The proximity fuse made the Kamikaze survivable. Without it, we would have lost half the fleet at Okinawa. General George Patton's assessment combined tactical appreciation with profound strategic vision. The proximity fuse won the Battle of the Bulge, but more than that, it showed us the future of warfare, weapons that think for themselves. Thank God we got it first. Winston Churchill, writing in his memoirs, provided a statesman's perspective. The proximity fuse saved London from the flying bomb. It was a weapon of defense that proved more valuable than any offensive weapon save the atomic bomb itself. The American genius for mass production of complex devices gave us a shield when we most needed it. Even German leaders, in their post-war interrogations, reluctantly acknowledged the proximity fuse's devastating impact. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt stated plainly, "The American proximity fuse made our traditional defensive positions untenable. We could no longer rely on entrenchments and fortifications. It was a revolution in artillery that we could neither match nor counter." While the proximity fuse undeniably saved countless Allied lives, its production carried hidden costs, a dark underside that emerged only decades later. The beryllium used in manufacturing proved to be a deadly, insidious substance. Workers at Sylvania, Crossley, and other facilities handled beryllium copper alloys daily, completely unaware of the metal's severe toxicity. Beryllium disease, with its terrifying 20 to 60-year latency period, struck hundreds, perhaps thousands of workers decades after the war, a silent, delayed casualty. Margaret Chen, whose mother worked at Sylvania's Ipswich Mills facility, testified before Congress in 2001. "My mother soldered proximity fuse components for 3 years. She was proud of her war work. In 1978, she developed beryllium disease. She died in 1983, drowning in her own lungs. She was a casualty of war, just 40 years delayed. The Department of Energy's former worker medical screening program, initiated in the 1990s, identified hundreds of World War II electronics workers suffering from beryllium-related diseases. Many had already tragically died, never knowing that their patriotic war work had ultimately killed them. Dr. Robert Meyer, who studied beryllium disease among war workers, concluded, "These women, and they were predominantly women, were soldiers in the war effort. They handled dangerous materials without protection because nobody knew the dangers. They saved thousands of lives at the cost of their own, just delayed by decades." It's a sobering reminder of the unseen sacrifices made for victory. The proximity fuse didn't just win battles. It revolutionized military doctrine, forcing a complete and often painful reconsideration of tactics that had evolved over centuries. Artillery tactics, for example, transformed overnight. For 500 years since the introduction of gunpowder, artillery had been primarily a direct fire or ground-burst weapon. Soldiers, in response, protected themselves by digging in, creating trenches, and building bunkers. The proximity fuse ingeniously turned these traditional entrenchments into death traps. Shells, exploding at predetermined heights, sent fragments downward at angles that reached into any foxhole, trench, or bunker without overhead cover. Major General James Gavin, the visionary commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, wrote in his post-war analysis, "The proximity fuse made traditional infantry tactics obsolete. We had to completely retrain our soldiers. Dispersion became essential. Overhead cover became mandatory. Movement replaced entrenchment as the key to survival." It was a radical shift, demanding new ways of thinking and fighting. Naval tactics experienced an equally profound transformation. Before proximity fuses, naval task forces required massive fighter umbrellas for protection against relentless air attacks, a constant drain on resources and manpower. After proximity fuses, surface ships could operate far more independently, their vastly improved anti-aircraft batteries providing a reliable, automated defense. This newfound flexibility dramatically accelerated the island-hopping campaign in the Pacific, allowing forces to move faster and with greater strategic freedom. Admiral Raymond Spruance noted, "The proximity fuse gave us tactical freedom we never had before. We could detach single destroyers for independent operations, knowing they could defend themselves against air attack. This multiplied our effective force by allowing dispersed operations. Air defense doctrine evolved dramatically, shifting from a statistical barrage, a hopeful spray and pray approach, to precision engagement. Pre-proximity fuse doctrine typically called for filling the sky with shells, hoping for lucky hits against fast-moving targets. Post-proximity fuse doctrine emphasized controlled, aimed fire with a significantly higher kill probability. Gun crews transitioned from being volume firers to precision marksmen, each shot carrying the weight of greater impact. The proximity fuse represented the first great, spectacularly successful example of Anglo-American technology transfer, a crucial model that would define Allied cooperation throughout the rest of the war and into the fraught years of the Cold War. The British provided the brilliant initial concept and pioneering research. The Americans, with their unparalleled industrial capacity and vast resources, provided the means for mass production and refinement. The combination proved utterly unbeatable. Neither nation alone, with their respective strengths and limitations, could have developed and deployed proximity fuses in time to affect the war's outcome with such decisive impact. Sir Henry Tizard, reflecting on this pivotal technology transfer, famously wrote, "We gave the Americans our ideas. They gave us back millions of weapons. It was the best trade Britain ever made." The success of this collaboration established crucial patterns of cooperation that continued post-war. The Proximity Fuse project became the very template for NATO technology sharing, intelligence cooperation, and joint weapons development that characterized the Western alliance throughout the Cold War. The proximity fuse's impact extended far beyond the immediate conflicts of World War II, establishing foundational technologies and techniques that shaped both military and civilian development for decades. The miniaturization techniques pioneered for proximity fuses directly influenced the nascent development of transistors and, later, the integrated circuit design that powers all modern electronics. James Van Allen himself, drawing on the shock-hardening methods he learned from proximity fuses, applied them to the instruments aboard Explorer 1, America's first satellite, which famously discovered the Van Allen radiation belts, immortalizing his name in space science. The organizational model used, university laboratories partnering with industry under robust government coordination, became the standard template for Cold War research and development. Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, created specifically for proximity fuse development, continues today as one of America's premier defense research institutions, having contributed to everything from submarine-launched ballistic missiles to deep space exploration. Quality control procedures, rigorously developed for proximity fuses, demanding an astonishing 80% reliability under extreme combat conditions, established entirely new standards for the aerospace and defense industries. The statistical process control methods pioneered by Western Electric for proximity fuse production became standard throughout American industry, elevating manufacturing quality across the board. The proximity fuse itself evolved into the modern smart weapons we see today. Radar-guided missiles, laser-guided bombs, and GPS-directed munitions all trace their direct lineage to this first smart weapon, the proximity fuse. The very concept of a thinking weapon, one that could make critical decisions without direct human intervention, began with Merle Tuvey's revolutionary vacuum tubes. In May 1945, as American technical intelligence teams raced through defeated Germany, securing secrets and scientists, they made a truly shocking discovery. In underground facilities and hastily abandoned laboratories, they found extensive German proximity fuse research, far more advanced than anticipated, but still years, tragically for them, from operational deployment. Colonel Howard Dix, leading Technical Intelligence Team 314, reported from the Luftwaffe research facility at Fulda-Rhone. The Germans had proximity fuse programs at every major research institution. They understood the principles perfectly. They had designs that might have worked. What they lacked was our industrial capacity to transform laboratory prototypes into mass production. The evidence was overwhelming and deeply ironic. At Peenemünde, the infamous site where V-2 rockets were developed, researchers had tested acoustic proximity fuses. At Rechlin, the Luftwaffe test center, photoelectric fuses underwent evaluation. The marine facility at Kiel had even developed magnetic influence fuses for naval shells. Dr. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, explained during his interrogation, "We knew about proximity fuses from captured American shells in December 1944. Our scientists said they were impossible. No electronics could survive such forces. When we finally believed they were real, it was too late. We lacked the vacuum tube technology, the production facilities, and, most importantly, the time. The German failure thus revealed the proximity fuse's true achievement. Not just technical innovation, but the extraordinary marriage of cutting-edge science and unparalleled industry on a scale only America could achieve in the intense, demanding conditions of the 1940s wartime. Japanese attempts to understand proximity fuses proved even more futile, bordering on bewilderment. Post-war interrogations revealed complete confusion about American anti-aircraft effectiveness. Admiral Soamu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, testified. By 1944, American anti-aircraft fire had become supernatural in its accuracy. Our pilots reported shells that seemed to chase their aircraft, exploding at exactly the right moment. We assumed it was a new type of radar control, never imagining the shells themselves contained radar. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, the pilot who led the Pearl Harbor attack, remarkably survived multiple encounters with proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire. He recalled, with a sense of lingering dread, "During attacks on American carriers in 1944, I watched experienced pilots simply disintegrate in midair, their aircraft shredded by shells that exploded without hitting them. We had no explanation. Some pilots believed the Americans had developed a death ray." The Japanese response, the desperate kamikaze tactics, represented a profound technological defeat. Unable to match American innovation, they resorted to turning pilots into living, guided missiles, accepting certain death to achieve any damage at all. While Germany and Japan failed to develop proximity fuses independently, the Soviet Union, in a chilling turn, succeeded through espionage. Julius Rosenberg, working at the Emerson Radio and Phonograph Corporation, a civilian defense contractor, stole a complete proximity fuse in 1944, meticulously delivering it to Soviet intelligence. The theft remained unknown to American authorities until Rosenberg's arrest in 1950. By then, however, Soviet forces had already deployed their own proximity fuses, based entirely on the stolen American designs. The Korean War, a bitter proxy conflict, shockingly saw communist forces using proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells against American aircraft. American technology chillingly turned against its original creators. David Greenglass, Rosenberg's brother-in-law, who eventually testified against him, stated, "Julius was proud of stealing the proximity fuse. He said it was more important than the atomic bomb information because it could be used immediately." He was, perhaps, terrifyingly right. Military historians consistently rank the proximity fuse among World War II's three most decisive technologies, alongside radar and atomic weapons. But unlike the atomic bomb, which was used only twice, proximity fuses saw continuous combat use from January 1943 through August 1945, affecting thousands of engagements across every theater of war. Dr. Arnold Kramer, a military historian at Texas A&M University, concluded, "The proximity fuse killed more enemy soldiers, saved more Allied lives, and influenced more battles than any other secret weapon of World War II. It was the war's most effective secret weapon because it was used everywhere, all the time, with devastating effect." The statistics overwhelmingly support this assessment. An estimated 25,000 enemy aircraft were destroyed or damaged by proximity fuses. Over 5,000 V-1 flying bombs were destroyed. Tens of thousands of enemy soldiers were killed by proximity-fused artillery. Allied lives saved numbered in the hundreds of thousands. But beyond the cold statistics lay a profound transformation. The proximity fuse changed how wars were fought, irrevocably introducing the age of smart weapons. It demonstrably proved that technological superiority could provide a decisive military advantage, a force multiplier beyond imagination. It proved that democratic nations, by mobilizing their civilian science and industry, could out-innovate and out-produce totalitarian regimes, even those driven by single-minded, brutal efficiency. Behind every single proximity fuse lay human stories of innovation, sacrifice, and unwavering determination. WWII never fully recovered from the war's intense pressures. Colleagues found him in 1946, sitting alone in his empty laboratory at Johns Hopkins, weeping. "All those boys who died while we were still developing the fuse," he reportedly said, his voice choked with emotion. "If we'd been faster, even by weeks, how many would have lived?" He spent his remaining years immersed in astronomical research, seeking a profound distance from the deadly world of weapons development. James Van Allen parlayed his wartime experience into pioneering space research. The shock-hardening techniques he developed for proximity fuses directly protected instruments on early satellites, launching a new era of exploration. When asked about his wartime work, he would say simply, "I helped save lives. Everything else I've done pales in comparison." The women who assembled proximity fuses, Betty Morrison at Crossley, Marie Collins at Johns Hopkins, and countless thousands of others whose names are now lost to history, carried their secret service quietly, with dignity. Most never knew what they had built until decades later, if at all. Their nimble fingers and patient precision, performing intricate soldering and assembly, saved countless lives half a world away. A silent, unseen heroism. The soldiers and sailors who fired proximity fuses, however, understood their value immediately, viscerally. Gunner's mate Anthony Puy of the USS Helena spoke for many. "Those green-banded shells were like having God on our side. Every time we loaded one, we knew some American pilot or sailor would live because of it." The proximity fuse program cost approximately $1 billion in 1940s dollars, a staggering $15 billion today. It required the coordinated efforts of 87 companies, 110 factories, and 80,000 workers. It consumed immense resources that could have built thousands of tanks or hundreds of ships. Was it worth it? The answer lies in battles not lost, in ships not sunk, in cities not destroyed, and, most importantly, in lives not sacrificed. Every Japanese aircraft destroyed before reaching its target saved American sailors. Every V-1 destroyed before reaching London saved British civilians. Every German soldier killed by airburst artillery could not, in turn, kill Allied soldiers. Admiral Chester Nimitz provided perhaps the best assessment of its true value. The proximity fuse was worth 10 divisions of infantry, 100 squadrons of aircraft, an entire fleet of ships. It was force multiplication through technology, the American way of war. History often remembers the generals and admirals, the famous battles and dramatic moments. It often forgets the scientists and workers who quietly created the essential tools of victory. WWII died in 1982. His name unknown to most Americans despite his decisive contribution to victory. James Van Allen achieved fame for space research, his wartime work largely overshadowed by his later stellar achievements. Lloyd Berkner, Richard Roberts, Henry Porter. Their names appear only in specialized technical histories. The women who assembled proximity fuses, working with deadly materials they didn't understand, building weapons they couldn't comprehend, remain almost entirely forgotten. No monuments honor their service. No medals recognize their immense, quiet contribution. Yet their patient precision saved more lives than most decorated heroes. Perhaps that anonymity is fitting. The proximity fuse succeeded through a collective, unprecedented effort. British scientists generously sharing vital secrets. American researchers solving seemingly impossible problems. Factory workers assembling complex miracles. Soldiers and sailors courageously employing revolutionary weapons. No single hero, but hundreds of thousands contributing to a common, vital cause. 2 weeks after that first devastating use at Monschau, as 1944 turned to 1945, Hetman Klaus Rita made his final diary entry, a poignant, almost philosophical lament. The Battle of the Bulge was failing. German forces were in desperate retreat. American proximity-fused artillery continued its relentless thunder, each air burst illuminating the snow-covered battlefield with deadly, terrifying efficiency. We face not just American soldiers, but American science, he wrote, a profound realization dawning. Their shells think, they calculate, they decide when to kill. We are fighting the future itself, and the future is winning. He concluded with a chilling prophecy. God help Germany, for we have awakened a giant whose weapons are guided by intelligence itself. Richter couldn't have known how truly right he was. The proximity fuse represented more than just superior technology. It embodied the inherent advantage of free societies mobilizing civilian expertise for urgent military purposes. While German scientists competed in isolation and Japanese researchers worked in technological ignorance, American scientists, British physicists, and Canadian engineers collaborated openly, sharing discoveries, solving complex problems collectively, their minds intertwined for a common goal. The proximity fuse was, in a profound sense, democracy's weapon, created by free people, manufactured by free workers, employed by free soldiers defending freedom itself. Its development required not just extraordinary technical skill, but an immense, unwavering foundation of trust. Trust between allies sharing their deepest secrets, between government and universities, between military and civilian sectors. That trust, a commodity impossible in totalitarian regimes where suspicion and control stifled innovation, provided the decisive advantage. From W.A. Butt's audacious concept in October 1939 to its unprecedented mass production by 1943, the proximity fuse traveled an incredible journey. From British desperation through American innovation to ultimate Allied victory. Along the way, it saved hundreds of thousands of lives, shortened the war by months, if not years, and irrevocably introduced the age of intelligent weapons that continues to define modern warfare today. The proximity fuse proved that wars could be won not just through raw courage and immense sacrifice, but through superior technology and an unshakable industrial might. It demonstrated that thinking weapons, imbued with artificial intelligence, could multiply force beyond anything previously imagined. Most importantly, it showed that free nations, by pooling their intellectual and industrial resources, could achieve miracles that totalitarian states, constrained by their own repressive systems, could only ever dream about. in those miniature vacuum tubes that James Van Allen taught to survive impossible forces, in those intricate circuits that Lloyd Berkner designed to detect approaching death, in those precise assemblies that countless unnamed women soldered with perfect precision. Therein lay the crucial margin between victory and defeat, between freedom and tyranny, between the world we inherited and one too terrible to contemplate. The proximity fuse was indeed the most effective secret weapon of the war, not because it was the most powerful or the most destructive in a single blow, but because it was used everywhere, continuously, decisively. It was the weapon that thought, and in thinking, it helped thinking people preserve their freedom to think. The German soldiers at Elsenborn Ridge, huddled desperately in bunkers that could no longer protect them, had encountered more than just superior firepower. They had met the future, a future where intelligence, embedded in the very fabric of weaponry, would multiply human capability beyond previous imagination. That future, born in the desperate days of 1940, tested and proven in the crucible of World War, on battlefields from the vast Pacific to the snow-swept plains of Europe, began with a simple yet profound idea. What if an artillery shell could think? The answer to that question saved the free world.